Tony Stephen had everything a boy could ever want, from the newest sneakers to video games that hadn't even hit the stores yet. But he could not buy good grades. His billionaire father, Jeremiah, was furious and ready to take everything away. But a quiet girl named Lucy held the key to his future. Stay to the very end to see how the Maid made him excel. Kindly endeavor to like, subscribe, and comment what you learnt if you find this story intriguing. This will enable it reach others who needs to see it. Tony Stephen lived in a house that looked more like a castle than a home. It had tall white pillars, floors so shiny you could see your face in them, and rooms that Tony hadn't even stepped inside. His dad, Jeremiah Stephen, was a man who built his empire from the ground up. Jeremiah was tough. He was the kind of man who didn't take no for an answer, and he expected everyone around him to be just as perfect as his business deals. That included his son, Tony. Tony was 16 years old, tall for his age, with a smile that could light up a room. He was a good kid. He wasn't mean, and he didn't act stuck up just because his dad was rich. But Tony had a problem. He liked to play. He liked to have fun. When he sat down to look at a book, his mind would just float away like a balloon letting go of a string. Tony went to St. Augustine's Elite Academy. It was the most expensive school in the city. The uniform alone cost more than what most people made in a month. The teachers there were dressed in fancy suits, and the classrooms had the best computers. But there was a secret about that school that nobody really talked about. The teachers were comfortable. They were paid well, but they didn't really push the students. They just stood at the board, wrote some things down, and expected the kids to figure it out. If a kid didn't understand, the teachers would just shrug and move on. Tony was smart, actually very smart, but he rushed. He didn't pay attention to the little details. In math, a plus sign looks a lot like a multiplication sign if you are going too fast. Tony was always going too fast. It was the first week of the long holidays. The morning sun was shining bright through the giant glass windows of the dining room, but inside it felt like a storm was brewing. Jeremiah was holding Tony's report card. The paper shook in his hand. His face was turning a shade of red that scared everyone in the house. Tony stood by the table, looking down at his expensive sneakers. He wished he could disappear. He wished the floor would just open up and swallow him whole. "This is unacceptable," Jeremiah's voice boomed like thunder. "Do you see this, Tony? Do you see these F's? I pay thousands of dollars for that school. Thousands. And you bring me this?" Tony mumbled. "I tried, Dad." "Tried? You call this trying?" Jeremiah slammed the paper onto the glass table. "In algebra, you got a 30%. 30. You are the heir to the Stephen Empire. You are supposed to take over all of this one day. How can you run a billion-dollar company if you can't even solve for X?" Tony's mom sat nearby, sipping her tea nervously. She didn't like it when Jeremiah got this loud, but she knew he was right about the grades. She just wanted peace. "Jeremiah, honey, maybe he needs a tutor," she said softly. "He has had 10 tutors," he yelled, pacing back and forth. "He plays with them. He jokes around. He doesn't focus. Tony, you are lazy with your brain. You have all the tools, but you refuse to build anything. If this continues next term, I am taking away the games, the phone, the car, everything. You will work in the mail room. Do you hear me?" "Yes, sir," Tony whispered. Tears were stinging the back of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He hated feeling stupid. He knew he wasn't stupid, but the numbers just danced on the page and confused him. In the kitchen, just through the swinging door, Lucy was washing vegetables. Lucy was 16, just like Tony. Her mother was the head maid of the Stephen household. Usually, Lucy would be at her own home, but there was a big house party planned for the next day, and her mom needed help prepping all the food. They had slept over in the staff quarters so they could start work before the sun came up. Lucy heard every word. She heard the slam of the paper. She heard the pain in Tony's voice. She felt bad for him. She didn't go to a fancy school. She went to the government secondary school down on 4th Street. The building had peeling paint, the desks were old and scratched, and sometimes the air conditioning didn't work. But Lucy loved it. She loved learning. She stood by the sink, rinsing carrots, and thought about what Jeremiah had said about algebra. She knew Tony wasn't dumb. She had seen him fix the Wi-Fi when the technician couldn't figure it out. She had seen him memorize rap lyrics in 5 minutes. His brain worked fast, maybe too fast. The shouting in the dining room finally stopped. Jeremiah stormed out to go to his office, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hall. Tony's mom went to chase after him to calm him down. Tony was left alone in the dining room. He slumped into a chair and put his head in his hands. He felt hopeless. He felt like no matter what he did, he would never be the genius his dad wanted him to be. Lucy dried her hands on her apron. Her heart was beating a little fast. She wasn't really supposed to talk to the family about personal things. She was just the maid's daughter. But she remembered how her teacher, Mr. Okon, always said that knowledge is like a candle. It only grows when you share it. She took a deep breath, pushed open the kitchen door, and walked into the dining room. Tony didn't look up. He just sat there, breathing shaky breaths. Lucy cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, Tony?" she said. Her voice was gentle. Tony looked up. His eyes were red. He saw Lucy standing there in her simple clothes, her hands clasped together. He knew her, of course. They had played tag in the garden when they were 5 years old, before they realized that he was the boss's son and she was the help. "Hey, Lucy," he muttered. "Did you hear all that?" "It was hard not to," Lucy said, taking a step closer. "My mom says your dad has a voice that can shake the roof tiles." "Yeah, he's pretty mad this time. He thinks I'm a failure." "You're not a failure," Lucy said firmly. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. This was bold, but she didn't care right now. "I heard him say you failed algebra." "Yeah," Tony sighed. "It's the equations. I do the work, I get an answer, but it's always wrong. The teacher says I missed the steps. I don't know, it's just a mess." Lucy nodded. "Can I tell you something? My school, the government one, it looks like a dump. The roof leaks when it rains heavily, but we have this teacher, Mr. Okon. He has a master's degree in mathematics. He could teach at a university, but he chooses to teach us because he says we have hungry minds. He taught me something about algebra that made it my favorite subject." Tony looked at her like she was crazy. "Algebra is your favorite subject? Are you serious?"
"Dead serious," Lucy smiled. "You have a pen?" Tony reached into his pocket and pulled out a fancy gold pen. He grabbed a napkin from the table. "Show me. It can't be worse than what I'm already doing." Lucy took the pen. "Okay, the problem with people like us, smart people who think fast, is that we rush forward. We want the answer now. But algebra is a story. You have to be able to tell the story backwards." "Backwards?" Tony frowned. "Yes, it's the reverse rule of operations," Lucy said, her eyes lighting up. "You know PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, and all that?" "Yeah, the order of operations," Tony said. "I know it." "That's for solving forward. But when you are checking your work, or when you are trying to find X, imagine you are unwrapping a gift. You wrapped it up one way, so you have to unwrap it in the opposite way to get to the prize inside. Tony, you aren't paying attention to the details because you're looking at the whole box. You need to look at the tape, then the paper, then the box." Lucy wrote a complex equation on the napkin. It was one of the ones Tony had failed on his test. She didn't just solve it, she talked to it. "See this +5? It's stuck there. To move it, we have to do the opposite. What's the opposite of plus?" "Minus," Tony said. "Right, so we -5 from both sides. We are unwrapping the gift." Lucy's voice was calm. She didn't make him feel stupid. She explained that at her school, they didn't have fancy calculators, so they had to truly understand how the numbers danced together. Her teachers were passionate. They didn't just want a paycheck. They wanted the students to win. They drilled these basics until it was like breathing. For the next hour, the billionaire's son and the maid's daughter sat at the glass table. Lucy showed him how to slow down. She showed him that if he checked his work by doing the reverse operation, he would catch his own mistakes before the teacher did. It was a simple trick, really. It was just checking your work. But the way she explained it, like unwrapping a gift, like reversing a movie scene, made it click in Tony's brain. "Wait," Tony said, staring at the napkin. "So, if I just take 2 seconds to look at the sign and ask, what is the opposite? I can't get it wrong." "Exactly," Lucy grinned. "You can't get it wrong because the math has to balance. It's like a scale. You are the one in control, Tony, not the numbers." Tony felt a weight lift off his chest. For the first time in years, the numbers didn't look like enemies. They looked like puzzle pieces waiting to be put in place. "Your teacher taught you this?" Tony asked. "Mr. Okan," Lucy nodded. "He says, details are where the truth hides. He makes us chant it sometimes." Tony looked at Lucy with new respect. He realized that while he was sitting in an air-conditioned classroom staring out the window, Lucy was in a hot room actually learning how to think. Her education wasn't about the building. It was about the teachers and the focus. Can you help me again tomorrow?" Tony asked. "Dad is going to be watching me like a hawk all holiday. If I can show him I'm studying, maybe he won't send me to the mailroom." "I can help," Lucy said, standing up as she heard her mom calling from the kitchen. "But you have to promise to slow down. Speed kills in math." "I promise," Tony said. He watched her walk back to the kitchen. He looked down at the napkin covered in numbers. It was messy, but it made sense. He folded the napkin and put it in his pocket like it was a $100 bill. Over the next few weeks, a secret routine started. When Jeremiah was at work and Tony's mom was at her charity events, Tony would sneak into the kitchen or the library and Lucy would meet him there. She brought her old, tattered textbooks. They were worn out with pages dog-eared, but the information inside was gold. She taught him the tricks her master-level teachers used. She taught him mnemonics, little songs and rhymes to remember formulas. She taught him how to read a word problem and turn it into a picture in his head. Tony realized that his teachers at the elite school were boring. They made everything sound dry. But Lucy, channeling Mr. Okan, made it sound like a challenge. She was tough on him, too. If he rushed and made a silly mistake, she would tap the paper and say, "Unwrap the gift, Tony. You ripped the paper." They would laugh, but he would go back and fix it. Jeremiah noticed that Tony was quiet. He noticed that Tony was in his room a lot, or in the library. He didn't see the video games on. He thought maybe his threat about the mailroom had scared the boy straight. He didn't know that the real reason Tony was working so hard wasn't fear. It was confidence. For the first time, Tony felt like he actually understood what he was doing. He wanted to prove to himself and to Lucy that he could do it. The holidays ended and school began again. Tony walked through the big gates of St. Augustine's Elite Academy with a different walk. He didn't slouch. He went to his classes. When the math teacher, Mr. Sterling, wrote a problem on the board, Tony didn't zone out. He watched. He saw Mr. Sterling make a small mistake on the board, forgetting a negative sign. Tony raised his hand. "Sir, shouldn't that be -12? The class went silent. Tony Stephan never spoke in math class unless he was called on to give a wrong answer. Mr. Sterling paused, looked at the board, and then adjusted his glasses. "Why, yes, it should. Good catch, Anthony." Tony smiled. He imagined Lucy giving him a high five. The term went by fast. The tests came. Usually Tony would sweat and panic during a test. He would rush to finish so he could get out of the uncomfortable feeling. But this time, he heard Lucy's voice in his head. "Unwrap the gift. Check the details. Reverse the operation." He took his time. He was the last one to finish the algebra midterm. When he walked out, he didn't feel sick. He felt lighter. Finally, the report cards for the term arrived. It was dinner time again. The scene was almost exactly the same as the holidays. The sun was setting, casting long shadows in the dining room. Jeremiah sat at the head of the table. Tony's mom was nervous. Tony sat quietly, cutting his steak. Jeremiah opened the envelope. The sound of the paper tearing was loud in the quiet room. He pulled out the card. He stared at it for a long time. Silence stretched. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Tony's mom couldn't take it anymore. "Jeremiah, is it bad?" Jeremiah lowered the paper. He looked at Tony with a look of pure confusion. "Straight A's. 98% in algebra, 95 in physics. Tony, how?" Tony put down his fork. He looked his dad in the eye. "I learned how to focus on the details, Dad. I learned that having the best computer doesn't matter if you don't know how to code it."
Jeremiah leaned forward. "Who is the tutor? I didn't hire a new one? Who taught you this?" Tony hesitated. He knew his dad might be mad that he was studying with the maid's daughter, but he also knew his dad respected results. "It was Lucy, Dad, the maid's daughter." "Lucy," Jeremiah frowned, "the quiet girl. But she goes to that government school downtown, the one with the broken fence." "Yes," Tony said, "and her teachers are geniuses. She taught me things my teachers at the elite academy never even mentioned. She taught me how to think, not just how to memorize. She has a teacher named Mr. Okon who has a master's degree. He teaches them because he loves it. Lucy knows more than I do, Dad. She's the reason I got these grades." Jeremiah didn't say anything. He just looked at the report card, then at Tony, then out the window toward the staff quarters. He was a businessman. He knew value when he saw it. He realized he had been paying for a brand name, St. Augustine's, but getting a generic product. Meanwhile, the real quality was hiding in a place he never looked. "Is that so?" Jeremiah murmured. "The teachers are that good." "Better," Tony said. "They actually care." Dinner finished in silence. Jeremiah was deep in thought. The next morning, Jeremiah did something that made the whole house shake. He didn't go to the office. He got in his car and drove to the government secondary school. He walked through the broken gates. He saw the peeling paint. But he also walked into the classrooms. He stood in the back of Mr. Okon's math class. He watched the teacher sweat in the heat, writing furiously on the chalkboard, explaining calculus with a passion that lit up the room. He saw the students, including Lucy, sitting on the edge of their seats, absorbing every word. Jeremiah saw the difference. At the rich school, education was a product you bought. Here, education was a fire you caught. He came home that afternoon and called a family meeting. Tony and his mom sat in the living room. Jeremiah stood before them, looking serious. "I have made a decision," Jeremiah announced. "I have always said I want the best for my son. I want him to be the best leader, the best thinker, the best man he can be." "So you're happy with his grades?" Tony's mom asked, smiling. "I am. And to ensure he keeps getting this level of education, I am making a change. Tony, on Monday, you are withdrawing from St. Augustine's." Tony's mom gasped. "What? But Jeremiah, that's the best school in the country. Where will he go?" Jeremiah pointed a finger in the air. "He is going to government secondary school on 4th Street. Tony's mom dropped her teacup. It shattered on the floor. The poor school? Jeremiah, are you crazy? It's dangerous. It's dirty. What will people say?" "I don't care what people say. I care what my son learns. I met the teachers there today. They are masters. They are brilliant. The building is crumbling, but the minds inside are strong. Tony learned more from one student of that school in 2 weeks than he learned in 10 years at his fancy academy. If that is where the knowledge is, that is where my son will be." He looked at Tony. "Are you up for it, son? It won't be comfortable. No AC, no soft chairs." Tony looked at his dad. He thought about Lucy. He thought about Mr. Okon. He thought about the pride he felt getting that A. "I'm ready, Dad. I want to learn from the best." The next Monday, the Billionaire's sleek black car pulled up to the rusted gates of the government school. The other students stared as Tony stepped out. He wasn't wearing a designer blazer anymore. He was wearing the simple checkered shirt and trousers of the government uniform. Lucy was standing by the entrance, her mouth open in shock. Tony walked up to her, his backpack over his shoulder. "Hey, classmate," he said. "You're crazy," Lucy laughed, shaking her head. "Your dad is crazy." "Maybe, but I'm ready to learn the rest of the secrets." Tony's mom remained in shock till today over that decision. She couldn't understand why a billionaire would send his son to a school with no windows. But the results spoke for themselves.
Tony didn't just pass, he excelled. He learned grit. He learned how to solve problems without fancy tools. He learned to respect people for their brains, not their bank accounts. Because of this, his dad rebuilt the school and paid the teachers extra stipend heavier than their government salary. Years later, when Tony took over his father's company, he was known as the smartest CEO in the industry, a man who could see details no one else could. And his chief financial officer? That was Lucy, the maid's daughter, who taught him that sometimes, to move forward, you have to know how to work backwards. Thanks for watching. May God help us to see the good in others. Share this beautiful story. Save, rewatch, like, and subscribe. See you in the next story.